right, everybody, we're going to get started. Please sit down. Welcome back for day 2 of Double Exposure 2016. This first panel is very timely. It's all about race and sort of the camera's eye. And I'm going to actually hand over to Cheryl Thompson, who is a reporter at the Washington Post. She has covered immigration. I have been studying her bio and feeling like, wow, we are so fortunate to have you here. She has actually done a series at the Post that was looking at tracing the origin of guns used in violent crimes. Her other work, did that one win an Emmy? That one won an Emmy. Another one, she was part of a team in 2002 that won a Pulitzer Prize. And she's going to introduce the other panelists and take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to actually let the panelists, welcome guys. Thanks for getting up kind of early on a Friday. At least it's early for me because it's Friday. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. A brief 1-minute introduction or so would be good. I'm going to start with Lyric.
Hi. I don't know if this is working.
It's on.
Oh, it's on? Okay. My name is Lyric Cabral. I'm a documentary filmmaker. Made a film called Terror, co-directed a film called Terror that was here last year. Now working on a film called The Rashomon Effect, looking at citizen journalism in Ferguson and partnering with Chris Seltzer.
Hello, I'm Chris Seltzer, citizen journalist, Ferguson activist. I'm currently investigating 2 officer-involved murders in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'll be working with Lyric Cabral.
Hi, my name is Craig Atkinson. I recently made a documentary called Do Not Resist, which is about police militarization, which is currently in theaters, and we're hoping to spread it around not only in theaters, but we're doing a police academy tour as well to hopefully try to bring the film to the people that we actually need to hear it. So we're going to be doing that throughout the next year. So that's what we're working on.
Craig also has Oscar cred. He just didn't want to say anything.
No, I don't have any Oscar cred.
Close to Oscar cred, no?
The people I work for.
Okay,
I don't know how
that will
close do you have
suffice
to be
for the purpose
in order
of
to
this
get
panel.
some of that to rub off. Yes, absolutely. Yes, lots of Oscar credit. No, I have none of Oscar credit, but Do Not Resist, I hear, is a contender. Contender. We'll see. Not important.
Very important. Peace, everybody. I'm Julian Terrell. I'm a community organizer from Harlem. I'm also a producer on the Argus Project, which we're going to be talking about. I spend a lot of my time working with folks in communities of color, talking about how do we document the police, but more importantly, how do we prepare ourselves for a community without police. I'd also like to say I'm a proud father. Say hello, Eileen. So just to bring that into the room, the work that we do as parents is also trying to make our communities and our society more safe for our kids. And hopefully that comes without police control.
My name is Jamie Calvin. I'm actually a 19th century novelist who got conscripted into investigative reporting and now finds himself surrounded by filmmakers and people working on other platforms and is trying to make sense of it. I'm the reporter who brought the Laquan McDonald incident to public attention, made known the existence of the video. So, you know, the relation of the kind of deep narrative reporting that I aspire to and video was very much in play in my experience. Also, I have a big investigative story that I was actually working on before the Laquan McDonald incident even occurred that is on The Intercept right now. Might be worth a look.
My name is Gan Golan. I'm an artist, an activist and community organizer, and have just been working for the last 20 years within social movements and looking at how art and culture really plays a role in organizing, and how that intersection of creative work and on-the-ground activism is really a powerful combination. So I work with Julian on the Argus Project, and we've been just spending a lot of time with activists and who are working with Cop Watch and doing citizen journalism on the very front lines, as well as families who've been directly impacted. And trying to find creative ways in which to reach audiences that might not be attending film festivals and other kinds of places where these media are normally distributed. And I'm a bit under the weather, so if I'm sniffing a lot, it's not for the same reason that Donald Trump is sniffing during his debates, just letting you know that.
Welcome to all of you guys. I want to start with Lyric. Lyric, your documentary, Terror, and if you guys haven't seen it, it is amazing. And it's Terror with T in parentheses and then error. It's clever. I don't know who thought of that, but it's really clever because it's about a paid FBI informant who poses as an al-Qaeda recruiter, who embeds himself with people that the FBI believe are involved in terrorist activities. And one was Tariq Shah, who's still in prison, I think, is due to be released in 2018. And he was a jazz bassist in New York who was charged and pleaded guilty, though he claims he was entrapped. He pleaded guilty to a conspiracy to provide material support for terrorism. The other is Khalifa al-Akili, who realizes the FBI, this guy was so clever, he realized the FBI was setting him up. And they eventually arrested him for a gun crime after he was seen in a photo holding a gun at a gun range. I guess the reason is because he was a felon, and felons are not supposed to have guns. And he's doing 8 years in prison. So my question is, you're a filmmaker with a journalism background. So did you approach this film more as a filmmaker or as a journalist?
Well, in the case of that subject matter, and I guess in the current project, looking at Canfield Green Apartment, sort of analyzing the Mike Brown shooting incident, I think I approach it as journalism because that is the best way to protect me, because typically I am reporting on institutions which are not transparent. In the case of Terror, it was the FBI. In the case of the next film, it is the DOJ Civil Rights Division. And so when you are dealing with institutions who are not transparent, who are likely to try to debunk the work, say this is inaccurate or this is incorrect, for me, journalism is the best protection. To go out as a journalist, I think that's better than artist, that's better than filmmaker. I've always gotten a better reception. I have a press pass. It doesn't say filmmaker. It says, I've always just found that to be the best protection for myself, my subjects, and the content.
Does it give you more credibility? Is that what you think helps?
In the field, yes. Yes, and with funders and things. And I think when you're trying to do work that challenges power, often the label of journalism, when you're able to cite sources and have footnotes and sort of be able to prove where the information came from, I think that's a protection.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious on this film, you sort of walked into this not knowing what you were going to find. And maybe I'll come back to that question. I'll leave them hanging. I'll save it till a little later. Thanks. But I did have one more question for you. When did you realize during this whole filmmaking process that the FBI was racial, it was actually profiled on a religious basis, because both of these guys were Muslims. One was white, even though if you weren't looking at him, you might not think so. He grew up clearly around people of color. That was clear from his voice. And the other was a black Muslim. And so do you think that, and when did you realize that the FBI was profiling?
I think I realized it immediately after 9/11. So in the wake of 9/11, especially I'm based in New York, so the FBI immediately started arresting immigrants. I think that was the sort of most easily accessible group to deport, people who had overstayed visas. A lot of taxi drivers were surveilled. So I did see an immediate sort of predominance of surveillance in the Muslim community. I'm Muslim, so when I would go to the mosque, I did see this militarization all of a sudden happening. I would see surveillance at the mosque and not the synagogues. So I sort of was aware that the government was profiling before this film. It sort of informed the reporting.
Mm-hmm. And your subject, Saeed, was it Saeed Torres? Y'all didn't get along very well at the beginning.
Oh no, he's just like that. That's the nature of our relationship. That's the best we're gonna get.
See, and that's why I wanted well, that's why I wondered, were you approaching this from a filmmaker's point of view or a journalist's point of view? Because I thought, man, as a journalist, somebody would have called my editor the way I talked to this guy. You guys were going back and forth. I was like, wow, they're going to kill each other before the first 5 minutes of this film.
You'd be very tense in a safe house.
Jamie, you advocate on behalf of racial injustice. And as you mentioned, you were the first to bring the Laquan McDonald case to the public. And you also successfully fought the city of Chicago, which, you know, as a Chicago girl, you're a guy after my own heart, who also, as a reporter, who also has to do battle with local governments for public records. You also, in bringing this case to light, how has what you've done impact? Because I'm sure the police department must adore you. So how has what you've done impacted the relationship between the police and the Black community?
So first I should say that I have all sorts of good relations with police officers. And I think it's important to remember that. Nobody would know the name Laquan McDonald if it wasn't for a whistleblower in law enforcement who reached out within a week of the incident and said, this is not what it appears to be, what was reported. It's horrific, there's video, and I don't trust my own agency to investigate it. The story I made reference to that's on the Intercept site right now is based wholly on whistleblower sources within the police department. So I think it's something important for us to remember that there's a really significant sort of silent majority within police departments that you know, are appalled by the same conditions that we are, and are also, in a way, victims of these conditions. I mean, I think of, with the Laquan McDonald case, there were 9 other officers on the scene when the shooter, Jason Van Dyke, within 30 seconds of getting out of his car, shot Laquan McDonald, who, well, you know, clearly, as we all know from the video now, was shying away from the police. Shot him several times, long pause, the boy's on the ground, completely immobilized, you know, writhing in pain, and then it turns into this sadistic execution. There are 9 other officers standing there. Those officers, a number of them have now been, are going to be criminally charged, are being fired, or the administrative process of firing them is in motion. I have no trouble extending to those officers the sort of sympathetic imagination that they responded like any of us would have responded to witnessing this atrocity. They go back to the station house, and they're told by a supervisor, lieutenant, sergeant, whoever was, you know, in command of this obviously problematic incident, this is how we're going to handle it. This is what you're going to say. This is what you're going to say. I can't imagine worse working conditions than that. You know, so I think it's important in our, you know, narratives that we figure out how we bring the police into the conversation, how we make visible those conditions. And, you know, having worked with whistleblowers within the police department who've been subject to really fierce and relentless retaliation, the code of silence is for real. It's not, you know, it's this term, but it's for real. And so one way of defining the sort of challenge right now is we have these institutions where it actually is required of people to be heroic to the point of martyrdom just to behave decently within their jobs. So I don't know if that was fully responsive to your question. I mean, the situation in Chicago right now is extraordinary because, well, let me put it this way. You know, one of the code of silence is a really powerful term, and it evokes realities, the silence of officers who are coerced into silence by fear of retaliation, but also really significantly the silence in the communities most affected, where people have no reason to believe that speaking out or complaining will be effective. But it also obscures some part of the reality, which is that this is less a matter of silence than of control of the narrative. And the code of silence, falsifying records, intimidating officers, intimidating witnesses, whatever range of thing, is in the service of the narrative. And the extraordinary thing about the Laquan McDonald case, and we now know this and have vast, you know, evidence of it, is that within hours of the boy bleeding out on the street, the city of Chicago, at the highest levels, knew everything we now know about that case. They had multiple police and civilian witnesses. They had the video, which we've all now seen, that couldn't be more definitive. They had, the autopsy was performed, he died at 10:45 or something. 8:30 the next morning, the autopsy was performed. Takes a while for autopsies to be finalized, but 16 shots, 16 independent gunshot wounds front and back. Doesn't take long to count.
Well, was there any doubt that the upper echelon of city government knew? I mean, it's Chicago.
So, but I think here's the thing that's challenging, and is I think a cover-up narrative about this is almost sentimental. You know, the idea that there was a handful of people who conspired in a room to say, we have to cover a bad thing happened, we have to cover this up. All the evidence that's come out suggests that this was standard operating procedure, and that they had every assumption that it would work as it would work as it had worked in the past. That seems to me a very different phenomenon. You know, we in the press, the cover-up narrative, the cover-up frame is almost reflexive. I think what we're contending with here, and not just in Chicago but nationally, is standard operating procedure, and that's much, much more challenging. So, you know, we're not dealing with a crisis right now of police violence. A crisis is a departure from the norm. What we're dealing with and contending with and trying to make visible in all of our work is, in fact, the norm. These are forms of structural violence that are built into the society we've created. And it requires, I think, a different kind of storytelling. And obviously, at the level of reform, the only reforms that matter are ones that go at foundational racism in these institutions. So, you know, I think that's at least a proper framing of this historic occasion we all find ourselves in the middle of.
So I'll go back to my question. How has your work impacted the relationship? Or has it?
Well, no, to go back to the image of the official narrative, one of the extraordinary, I mean, so most people know, at least in broad strokes, the history of the Laquan McDonald story. I mean, the city, literally from the first moments this occurred, at every juncture and at every level, doubled down on a narrative they knew to be false. Huge, huge investment. And that took the form of intimidating witnesses, destroying evidence, falsifying reports, ultimately a $5 million settlement with the family in the hopes of keeping the video from coming out. So, you know, this huge institutional investment in the official narrative. What has happened in Chicago is that the official narrative, to a degree I never could have imagined, has cratered and collapsed. And it has completely changed the political landscape. I mean, it's an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. And I think the case of Laquan, I mean, for me, it's just been mysterious and fascinating, and I really get more credit than I deserve, and I think played a small part in this. But the Laquan McDonald story is now a public narrative in Chicago and to some degree nationally that bears comparison with Emmett Till. You know, it is one of those stories that has broken through into people's moral imaginations. It's one of those stories that, I mean, there's not a day, I mean, it's part of the language of Chicago politics right now and our common life in Chicago. And to an extraordinary degree, it's become a story through which people make access to these profound structural conditions within institutions. So it's not just a narrative of the fate of this single child. It has been a window, and as I say, it's completely changed the political landscape.
I'd like to come back to that comparison with Emmett Till. Thank you for that. Craig, the possible Oscar contender, Do Not Resist, explores several issues, including SWAT teams and the militarization of police in the U.S. And if you guys haven't seen it, it's another amazing film. It just looked at so many different things, and I'll get to the Juno issue in a minute. What's different about the way you tell a story than what we would read in the Washington Post or the New York Times?
Well, I think that we started a year prior to Ferguson, so we thought we were going to have to break the story to the American public and what was happening with the police and all the equipment that they were receiving, but also the mentality shift, which was more than anything, what I was curious about, after the Boston Marathon bombing, I thought the police approach to the community was much more of an occupying force. And with my father being a law enforcement officer for 29 years, I thought something perhaps had shifted from his era. Not saying that that era was perfect, but it seemed to be more connected with the needs of the community to some extent. And so when I was sharing this idea that I wanted to do a film on the police militarization a year prior to Ferguson, before the country woke up to this issue, I was being disregarded as either a conspiracy theorist or someone that just has wild fantasies. And I said, well, no, you can see the writing on the wall. It's just critical thinking, just connecting these things together. And so I knew that if I was going to do a piece with experts or talking heads or put my father's story into it, it was only going to be one section of a narrative that I could put forth. And I said, instead, let's put the camera exactly in the situations and let people decide for themselves. And the feedback that we've been getting is, thank you so much for not putting your personal story into it. Thank you so much for not putting experts and talking heads into it, because we just have an opportunity to see and go beyond the headlines that we've been hearing since Ferguson and get to see what this actual exchange looks like. What does a drug search warrant look like? And we had the opportunity to go on one that is indicative of with this department, they do 200 a year. And they were telling us, oh, it was going to be a drug kingpin. And we go and they smash out the windows and...
Ooh, don't tell, because that's my next question.
Okay.
Don't give it away.
Well, to sum up the first question, I think that it was important for us to be there and to see it, and not to glorify the officers and not to not to condemn the accused. And since 1989, we've seen the TV show Cops, and it's always from the perspective of how awesome these cops are, and then it's just pixelated faces of people being arrested. And our approach was, well, can we take the pixelization away and go talk to the individuals that were just raided and say, well, tell me what that was actually like, and hear that side of the story? And it was something that we thought that was lacking in the whole portrayal of police in the community. So we thought that an observational approach would be the only effective way to communicate ideas that people hadn't even accessed yet.
So leading into that, thank you for that tease. So what surprised you most while you were making this film? Was it the SWAT team converging on this house? If you guys, it's like SWAT team, they're breaking out windows. It's this little house somewhere. Was it Florida?
That was in South Carolina.
South Carolina. They had palm trees, so I automatically stereotyped it and thought Florida. And they're breaking windows, and there's like, what, a dozen of them, and all they come up with is a trace of marijuana. And somebody asking them, are you going to pay for our window that you broke? So what surprised you most? Or was it the tiny town of Juneau, Wisconsin, which has had no homicides, purchasing these armored military vehicles?
Well, that raid was incredibly shocking, but it was even more shocking when we're standing around talking to the police afterwards, and we're like, well, how often do you do this? And they're like, oh, we do this 3 to 4 times a day. Like, we do this 200 times a year. And that, to me, was probably the most shocking. And I think for my father, too, being a cop watching this film, he was on SWAT for 13 years. They did 29 search warrants total in 13 years. Contrast that to teams that we were going out with, and they're doing it 3 to 4 times a day, 200 times a year. And so there's been this significant mission increase. And why? Well, we see it in the film, which is after they smash the guy's window and arrest him. He was supposed to be a drug kingpin. He's a 22-year-old black college student who has a landscape business, and he reaches in his pocket before he gets arrested and says to the officer, "Hey, can you give this to my boss who's coming by? I went to go buy the lawnmowers, but I needed an ID and I didn't have it, so I came back. But I need this to buy a steel weed eater. Can you give it to him?" And the cop says, "Yeah." And he gets arrested, and they seize the money for through asset forfeiture. And that's the mechanism by where I think you've seen the mission creep with SWAT, because you're financially gaining from those SWAT raids. So, it's worth it to go in and smash all of these windows, because you might find $1,000. Well, that just paid for all the overtime, for your day, and now you can hit all these other houses. So to find out that there's a significant for-profit policing model that's being used in such fashion is absolutely unbelievable. You take the equitable sharing program, where the idea of asset forfeiture makes sense on paper. You take a criminal's money, you put it in a general fund for your city, you can pay for schools, roads, things like that. On paper, that makes sense. But the feds came in and said, we're not seizing enough property. I don't know what their thinking was, but it turned out to be that they said, listen, if you include one federal agent on your task force, then your department gets to keep 80% of the money, and we'll take 20% as a kickback system. So here we are in 2014 was the first year that there was more money seized through asset forfeiture than American citizens had taken from them through burglary. So $5.1 billion was amassed in 2014 through asset forfeiture, taking citizens' money, harvesting wealth out of communities, whereas only $3.5 billion was taken through citizens through criminal activity. So you've given people the tools of war, and then you've given them a financial incentive to use those tools. It's no different than Ferguson, where they're taxing citizens to pay for the operating revenue of their department. You could probably speak to this more, but Jennings lost $1 million in sales tax revenue because they lost the shopping center one year. Wouldn't you know, they got $1 million more money the next year through ticketing their citizens. So how many police interactions didn't need to happen? How many of those actions turned violent? So my thinking is, I don't think that we're going to change the hearts and minds of people that have been, thinking in racist terms since, they got onto the job. My thinking is, how can we reduce this for-profit model that is requiring cops, who are oftentimes caught in the middle, and being given a top-down objective that puts them at odds with their community. So even the best cops, I talked to a lot of cops in Ferguson, they're like, we don't really want to treat citizens like ATMs, but we have to fill these quotas, And so you've required police officers to become the de facto tax collectors in a community. And so you've turned the relationship on its head just from that mechanism. It's no longer protect and serve. It's let's see what we can raise, for this particular quarter. So that was shocking, to say the least.
So how many of those raids were done on people of color?
In my experience, all of them.
Wow.
All of them. I went on a half a dozen raids, never found anything, by the way. One time we tore up this woman's house in Rockford, Illinois for a bowl of weed, destroyed the home. They found a bowl of weed. One time they ran into a house in St. Louis County in north part of the city for a computer. It was in the middle of the night. I don't know why we needed to raid the house at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was for child pornography. Horrible crime. I'm glad the person is off the street. The only thing about it, he wasn't there. So, they raid in the house with the full force of the SWAT team. His parents are there. They think they're being attacked. I mean, most homes in this country have guns in them. People reach for a weapon because they think they're being attacked, and then they end up getting killed by the SWAT team, and then the SWAT team gets let off because you're pointing a weapon at a police officer.
Wasn't there a woman, an elderly woman in Atlanta, and they raided her house?
Yeah, and I believe this is the one I'm thinking of. Her son had given her like a effective revolver, just because there was neighborhood kids that would come in the house from time to time and just to scare them away. And she's hard of hearing, grabs a revolver, goes downstairs, and the cops just murder her. But we see time. I mean, but it's not. They're entering homes. I mean, they're doing search warrants now in St. Louis County for code enforcement. You didn't pay your gas utility bill. We've seen it around the country using it for student loans, unpaid student loans. We've seen it in Florida. I mean, mind you, in Florida, you have a very wonderful example of how SWAT can be used. You have an armored vehicle puncturing a hole in the Pulse nightclub shooting, and it freed those hostages. Wonderful use of SWAT. Same SWAT teams, months prior, raiding barbershops for cutting hair without a license. Terrible use of SWAT. Unnecessary use of SWAT. So again, it's anytime we have these events, we need these tools for these events. However, all the police officers said we're using this for terrorism, so we'd show up for these raids, and I'd say, okay, what are we doing today? And it was almost always search warrants, almost always for drugs. You look at the Electronic Frontier Foundation's analysis of the sneak and peek provision of the Patriot Act, which allows police officers to go in your home without you being there and then maybe tell you about it after the fact. Sneak and peek provision. So 2013, there was 11,000 warrants issued for the sneak and peek provision. How many of those for terrorism? 51. How many of those for drug crimes? Over 9,000. So I'm not so sure that we need more surveillance equipment. I think that if you have it, I think you need to use it for the mission that you actually said it was going to be used for. And maybe, we had the biggest surveillance network known to man prior to the Boston Marathon bombing, prior to the San Bernardino shooting, prior to this most recent incident in New York, where the guy's father told the FBI that I'm suspecting my son of terrorism, yet that individual was able to go on eBay, buy citric acid, ball bearings, and an ignition switch Why is that? How did our massive surveillance network not catch that? Well, maybe because they're using it for drug crimes and not trying to solve terrorism like they said they were going to. Maybe that was never the intention. So here we are, seeing, after all of these events, it's always like we need more equipment, we need more surveillance, and clearly we've had, that surveillance net in line, and it hadn't caught all these other ones. So why do we need more?
What happened to the young man in South Carolina? Did he lose his business? Did he lose his job?
It's a great question. Everyone is shocked to find out that, of course, he didn't get his money back because through asset.
That I didn't ask because we kind of knew.
Yeah, sure.
That,
right.
that
Obviously,
1100 disappeared.
Some people are shocked to find that out. But through civil asset forfeiture, your property is guilty until you prove it innocent. So it might take you $2,500 to fight it in a court of law. Well, he's only trying to get back $876. So we went back there the next day. We talked to him. He was let out of prison, for his half a gram of weed, and he was trying to figure out how he was going to buy the lawnmower, or how to create a legitimate business for himself. And it was just absolutely heartbreaking. And the fact that yes, they smashed the windows, and nothing happened, and they went on to the next house. And when we're talking about police reform, it's like if you're saying you're going to find a kilo and you find nothing, you at least have to repair the windows. These people had to sleep with bugs coming in their home that night. And I was watching an episode of Dallas SWAT, and they ran in the house, didn't find anything, and they're like, well, maybe he flushed it. So they went and got a hacksaw and hacked the guy's pipes. The pipe is only this big. Like, how much contraband are you going to find in a pipe this big? Of course, they didn't find anything. But now that man sleeps with sewage running into his basement. Rather than, so it's like there's such a disconnect from the police and the community, and how we think that that's not going to create ill will in the community over the course of time. There was children in the home. They said they had already been to the home. I see it no different than the drone program that, well, statistically only 10% of the people that are killed are intended targets. Over 90% are either unknown or innocents. Well, that creates massive ill will in communities, and there's reasons for people to not like that. It's the same thing that we're doing domestically, going into lower income neighborhoods, hitting these houses 3 to 4 times a day. You don't think people are going to get upset with that? It's been going on for decades now. When I was in Ferguson, a lot of people were there for Mike Brown, but a lot of people were there that would tell me, they're like, we've been dealing with this for decades. And it's this over-policing, these interactions that we have to have the cops for a saggy pants violation or for a residency permit. So if you come out of a house, correct me if I'm wrong, if you come out of a house, you don't have the address listed on your ID in Ferguson, you can get a residency ticket for not living there. So why are these things are put in place? Because communities were failing, they weren't financially viable, and they needed to support that, and they decided to use the citizens as ATMs. So.
We have a confer right here for a second. Okay. Kevin, you recorded the Michael Brown incident almost the same way that George Holliday did. Just a quick quiz. Do you know who George Holliday is? See, that's youth. Almost the same way George Holliday did in the 1991 incident involving Rodney King in Los Angeles, from an apartment and a balcony. You then shared the video with news outlets. Why was it important to you to film this?
Well, for me, it was a joke. We didn't believe, we see the police stalk us. We see the police terrorize us. Like, everything he's speaking of is terroristic tactics that they do to regular people. So this particular day, when I seen this, I was laughing like, I didn't know what was getting ready to take place. And after seeing it, I was so shocked. Like, I just couldn't stop, and I haven't stopped, and they keep doing it.
You had just moved there, right? You moved there.
10 months.
2 months?
10 months.
10 months you had lived there. And what was it, because are you from Ferguson?
No, I'm from St. Louis City, but it's all one. I didn't know about Ferguson until Ferguson happened.
I don't think many people knew about Ferguson until Ferguson happened. But, so what did you think? You said you thought it was a joke, but when you realized it wasn't, what went through your mind?
Not again. Like, I actually had something to where I knew if I said, well, I saw the police kill somebody, or I saw the police do this, just me being me, a young black male convicted felon, it's not worth anything. Like he said, I gave the world a narrative to make your own decision. Like, they killed Mike, and then like after they killed him, they just punished us, punished us, punished us for being there. We were, before the media even had access to us, they shut my entire neighborhood down with every police force from every municipality for something they did. And it was like they were showing us, we control this. They wouldn't let you leave. I have dozens of people that were standing around me calling, just in disbelief. The police just killed somebody, man, I'm stuck. And for us to see how far I wanted to see how far they were gonna go.
The world saw how far they were willing to go.
Not yet, they will though.
And so were you and are you angry at the police for the way they handled that incident, including sort of barricading you guys from leaving your own community?
Angry at the police? No. They just doing their jobs. I'm angry at the system. I'm angry at the president. I'm angry at the mayor. I'm angry at the governor. I'm angry at anybody that had enough common sense to see what they were doing to us on national television, and then you send in more military police to barricade our neighborhoods, and when they issued the curfew and locked us down, your name on your ID wasn't good enough. So, no, I'm not angry at them. She asked me, did I want to go see the White House? No. That was like this, that was an insult, like no.
No, you gotta go by the White House.
For what? Did they come see us when we were on TV screaming, help us?
Did
I'm an American
Obama didn't go to
citizen.
Ferguson? Eric Holder.
Way to go.
It was his proxy. He was his attorney general. That's kind of his job, right, Eric Holder? Did you all ask for the president?
Several times. When they were gassing us in our community and I was running, like we were already on curfew, and people were out at the memorial. They were up on West Florissant rioting, and we were in our community, in our neighborhood, minding our own business, not rioting, not protesting. We were still grieving and getting a tongue lashing from America about the Ferguson riots. But this particular night, the tear gas blew into the neighborhood, and we were like roaches in a box scattering. And I just started recording my neighbors, and I was like, send this to the president. Let him see people grabbing kids that don't belong to them, putting them in cars, trying to get them from inhaling this gas. Mothers screaming, where's my baby? Like, people running around. Now, it had got so bad, people had their face tied up, they're outside with guns. It's like, am I still in America? Like, and this is not going on in Ladue, South County, Clayton. Like, we're in this little pocket where if you got out, it was okay. But in this little pocket, they were punishing us. And we were, I mean, if I go to the White House, I'm gonna cut one of my laptops on and put it on the desk of whoever wants to see it. And I'm gonna ask them, where were you on this day? I believe Obama was dancing.
Okay then, well, I like my job at the Washington Post, so I'm not gonna say anything about that. But
I don't work for
because I'm not sure where he was that day,
I
actually.
can say what I want to say. So
That's true.
I
You
believe he
can.
was dancing that day. We were being terrorized, and I personally, as a grown man, cried out for him. No response. No, nothing.
But you get that what you did and what others did in Ferguson, you guys are the reason that police shootings are now given attention right? It was Ferguson. It was Ferguson that now, whenever there's a cop shooting, it makes national news. It's because of Ferguson.
All that does is hurt us. That's not anything that I personally, being one of the people that put those videos out, every time there's a shooting, I know about it.
How does
no
that
matter
hurt you?
where. Because it just reminds me of what they did to us, and they're continuing to do it and do it and do it. Ferguson wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. Okay, we got Mike here. Okay, we gonna separate Mike. What about all these other people that did nothing? I know people that couldn't go to school. They're trying to be part of a society that says, do this and you'll be okay. People tell me all the time, well, maybe you should do what the police tell you to do. All that does is let them hit me with my hands down or up. I'd rather be in a defensive stand because I know I'm gonna get hit regardless. Watching the police kill people on TV, you know what I get? Calls from other people's mothers where I help them bury their kids, and I listen to them cry. Chris, they're doing it again. And all I tell them is, I'm working on it. That's not enough.
Yeah, you can
I just want to
jump in
interject,
whenever you
because he's a resident of Canfield Green, and I think it would be powerful actually to show the video, because most citizen journalism, and this is actually why I started working with Chris, because most citizen journalism captures the incident. We're so used to sort of that moment that Chris is speaking on, seeing a black body in distress, the violence. But what's interesting about his videos, he did not, in fact, record the Mike Brown shooting incident. Chris started filming about 15 seconds after. And what is interesting and very informative about his videos is that it has eyewitness testimony. No less than 40 individuals who saw Darren Wilson gun down Mike Brown. And sort of for me, what the interesting thing is that the raw footage, there's a huge discrepancy between what the witnesses are saying on the ground, who are predominantly black, and what the DOJ report says.
I think we have it.
Yes. And this, people have seen,
Roll
just
tape.
to add context, you guys have seen, no, not this one, the one that's labeled Chris. But just to add context, this video premiered on Anderson Cooper, CNN 360. I'm sure most of you have seen it, but I just think it's powerful to show what he shot in raw form, just to see the police, to see the community response. I think it really speaks to what we're speaking on.
Hey, them was real. Hey.
You know what, can you put on the other clip? Sorry. The lyric one? Can you switch it? Yeah, it'll add a little. And hopefully this little clip will add context to that, just to put what Chris did in context.
So that's Canfield Apartments? Oh, well, duh.
It's empty. There's nobody here. I feel like I'm walking through a ghost town. It's like I'm walking through a shell of what my life used to be. This is the location where I shot the video. I was actually, I placed my iPad in this window. As you can see, I got the view to what was going on. And I came out right here and ran upstairs to see what was going on. I missed this shit by
I don't know.
15 seconds.
The police just took this man right in our house.
I could see the police and the people, so I continued filming. Then I walked over there, over the hill, to see what was going on. And that's when I discovered the body.
They shot him about 7 motherfucking times.
Stop. What the fuck?
We'll lock him up. You don't fucking shoot that man.
Only minutes before, Ferguson police had shot and killed unarmed teenager Michael Brown.
And his blood just leaking in the street.
They did not have to do that. On August 9th, it was like standing in a war zone. It smelled like the 4th of July, kind of, because of the gunpowder.
Homicide pulling up.
Chris Seltzer and other citizen journalists in Ferguson used mobile devices to film, tweet, Facebook, and Instagram the events that followed. And their version was going viral.
Police have shot this man for no reason.
Long before national media or cable news arrived on the scene, the Ferguson community was telling its own story.
Just to give some context about what he filmed, but I think that sort of eyewitness testimony is very jarring, like from the media. And again, like the Laquan McDonald, there is a big discrepancy between the official sort of police narrative and in this case, the Department of Justice narrative versus sort of what the people have seen and are saying.
Okay, thanks. Gan, the killing of black folk by police has been going on for years. With basically no outrage outside of the black community. I wrote about a 14-year-old kid in D.C., Deontay Rawlings, who was unarmed and fatally shot in the back, dead center, actually in the back, by an off-duty D.C. cop over a stolen mini bike. The officer, there were no protests, there was no outrage, there was no indictment. The officer got a day's suspension, and he is back on the force and remains on the force. I want to talk about the people who have also been victims of this. There's, then Michael Brown happens, right? Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, we forget about Sandra Bland, Walter Scott, Keith Scott, Terrence Sterling here in DC recently, Alton Sterling in Louisiana, Terrence Crutcher in Oklahoma, and Alfred Olongo in El Cajon. How important were cameras and citizen journalism in these cases and thrusting them into the public consciousness and onto the front pages?
I think we're seeing cities across America erupting in mass protest in response to what looks like an epidemic of police violence, but we know that the phenomenon has not increased in any measurable way, that this is decades long, centuries long, if we want to be real about it. And the only thing that has changed is we're finally having a national conversation precisely because of the footage that's been captured by citizen journalists, everyday people who I think are making a very courageous decision to film these incidents and then take that footage and making sure that it gets in the right hands and then getting it out to the public in a way that is challenging a system of control and power that is enforced by violence. And that's why we're having this conversation, is because for decades, maybe even centuries, certain populations, groups of people in this country have not been believed. And the truth that has been spoken has been discounted, and the video footage is now making it undeniable. And so I think it's really a question about whose truth is being believed by society in general, and it goes to the very core of, racism in this country, but I think the video has finally made these things. We can't, for those parts of America that didn't believe it, did not have direct experience it, that maybe even we could say benefited from the existing system, now can't dismiss the truth.
But you're right, citizen journalism and cell phone cameras are playing a huge role, right? And they've made this issue is now being seen as an American issue and not just a black issue. And your project, the Argus Project, is very artistic. And film, as we know, is an artistic medium as well as an informational one. So what responsibility does a citizen documentarian / journalist have to go the informational route rather than the artistic route? Is it responsible socially to go the artistic route?
I think it's, you know, these systems are not just enforced by violence, they're also enforced by narrative and culture and mythology, and the reason that certain reasons that police are automatically believed in our society, that someone who, because of their profession, is automatically good, is automatically truthful, which is, you know, I think a ridiculous assumption for anyone in any profession. But the reason is it's bolstered by so many layers of culture that exist in our society that tell us that. You flip on a television set, you're going to see tons and tons of cop shows that are telling us that police equals good. And even if there's a bad cop, there's still some sort of moral center of a good cop who's, you know, turning in the bad cop, right? So there's this narrative that is constantly being pushed on society that is makes cops automatically kind of the moral center, and therefore anyone they're arresting is, is obviously guilty of something. And this is all mythology, right, that is being put out constantly. And so part of what we're doing, taking an artistic approach, is we're actually trying to attack that mythological part of this equation, right? And I think there's incredible work being done on the ground by frontlines activists who are pulling out their cell phone cameras and doing that work. And we're just trying to amplify it by directly challenging that mythology. And just to give you a quick sense of what the project is, it's a transmedia project, meaning it has a few different pieces, but at the center of it, we're actually building a counter-surveillance exosuit. And we kind of started with this question, you know, if police wear body armor in order to protect themselves while in public, what does the public need to wear in order to protect themselves from the police? So we're building an actual bodysuit that is loaded from head to toe with cameras and other sensors and devices that, in working with Cop Watch chapters, we're actually going to be deploying out on the streets to very visibly monitor and surveil police activity. And it's a nonviolent response to a situation of violence, but it's meant to make it very clear that citizens are actively a power to be contended with in videotaping the police. But it's also a spectacle, an artistic spectacle, that's creating an image of heroism around the people who are doing this. You know, there's so many images of heroism, even when, you know, I was watching Do Not Resist, so much of what the police show up with is not just weapons of violence, but symbols that are meant to project power, right? The costumes, the armored vehicles, all of those are symbols. They're not just tools. And so we are also creating symbols that are creating a mythology of heroism to amplify the work that people are doing on the ground. And there's a pop culture strategy there. You know, a lot of people that resonates. I think when I personally love a lot of pop culture. It's kind of a common place where a lot of Americans get our media and get our culture. You know, it's not from museums and art galleries, and so we're kind of creating a kind of pop culture image that is meant to show, you know, spark people's imagination about what it means to go out and film the police, and saying that's a very courageous and heroic thing to do. So that's kind of why we've taken that approach.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Julian, didn't forget you down there. How is investigative filmmaking reshaping the way we think about the relationship between the community or communities of color and the police?
I think we have to think about who's watching it, because for some of the videos, it's not reshaping anything at all. I mean, it's really just showing what we see every day. I think I spend a lot of my time talking primarily with young people about their relationships with the cops, or I would say the lack thereof. When you talk about a relationship, at least I would like to say it's based on respect. I would like to say it's based on an exchange where both sides are valued. And when we understand that that's not the case, I wouldn't call it a relationship. I would say that there's officers who there's officers who exist in our community, without any type of decision-making power from the folks who live in that community. So I think that now, a lot of times where we have the videos that are being put up, I think, one, it's able to broadcast similar to what other folks have been saying on the panel, but I think specifically what we saw in the clip, right, it's not just the fact that, somebody was shot, it's the fact that it's a constant reminder and it's a constant re-triggering. It's a constant, re-traumatization of the people who live in these communities. So when you see these videos, for however long that video is, yes, you are seeing the atrocity of somebody being killed, but it's also a reminder that, yes, it is happening again, right? Just the fact that a video in itself has to be put online or has to be given to, saying like a media outlet to show is to say that, one, that this is allowed, right? Because it wouldn't be happening if it was being allowed, right? Mm-hmm. We can at least shake our heads on that, yes, okay, right? But also to the fact that what comes after that, right? When we had the Eric Garner case, right, that video wasn't used in that case, right? For a lot of people, right, the people had been filming the police before and everything like that, but when the video got uploaded around Eric Garner again, right, there was no justice in that case. Right? Their family is still fighting, right? So I don't think that there's always the piece where like people are filming it to the point where they put up where they hope there's gonna be justice. Folks just want to know that this is what's happening in our neighborhood, and the fact that in 2016 that we still have to have conversations, right, about community police relations, right? The fact that we still have to have that anytime you speak out against the police, and sometimes when people do it, it comes with a disclaimer, but I still support the good cops, right? Or I still support our troops, right? It gets to the point where it's like our relationships are being built around the fact that we almost have to compromise what our reality is, right? I think when you're talking about young people, especially who live in the communities who are coming up, right? I talked to my daughter, she's 7 years old, right? I don't want to be having conversations about police violence. I don't want to be having conversations about what do you do when you walk by a police officer, right? Because at the end of the day, I've seen young people as young as 8 taken out of their classrooms in cuffs, right? This is the reality that we live in, right? So when we talk about a relationship, I would love to get to the point, right, where there is respect that's interjected, or when you have elected officials who are talking about we need to be able to open up a conversation. We need to understand that there's been a broken relationship that started a long time ago, one, and two, we never asked for police to be in our communities in the first place. Right, the issues that are trying to be solved in our communities also come from the same symptoms that are creating this police violence. We talk about the drug war, right? Last time I checked, there aren't any poppy fields in Harlem. Last time I checked, right, the surveillance or the floodlights that exist outside of, public housing in East Harlem, that equipment isn't being made, in East Harlem. It's not being made in Brooklyn. It's not being made in Ferguson. Right? Or the vans. I don't know if anybody's ever been to public housing in New York City, but if you have, right, you'll see a van, right? And the van literally has a surveillance tower that comes out of the top of it. Think about that. Think about that. Think about what would you do if you were going to school every day and that is the first thing that you see. So when we talk about making an exosuit, one of the things I love talking about is it's like, well, why is that crazy to be able to create a suit when we see this in real life outside of our doors every day? Right? So I think the relationship, especially that I love about, being able to film it is something that's where I don't have to ask, for something that's outside of me. If everybody has a cell phone in your pocket, then you have power right there, right? And when we're talking about communities, we're talking about intentional relationships. Those are the relationships that I ask folks and that we ask folks through the Argus Project and the projects that we choose to support. Those are the relationships that we want to lift up. People within their communities who are actually acting as a community in that moment to be able to take out their cell phone and not to ask, what did this person do, right? Is this person in the wrong? And if so, then I won't pull out my cell phone. Or if not, then I won't. It's just like, you know what? I see a situation where somebody's being stopped. I'm going to take care of my cell phone because we don't know what this situation is going to escalate in, right? So when we talk about citizen journalism, we're talking about what are the responsibilities that citizens have to another citizen, right, on a human level. Because at the end of the day, we're not talking about individuals as cops. Once they take that uniform off, then I'll deal with them on a human level, right? Before they clock in, I'll deal with them on a human level. When they're in uniform, what they are representing is a system of power, right? That is what they represent. That's why I talked to the whole piece around police control, right? It is the symbols. It is the fact that once you deal with the fact that somebody's been killed, you still have a community response, and that needs to be given attention to. Those are the relationships that we're trying to lift up through the project. And when we talk about citizen journalism, I think that's the opportunity, that we really have, right? What is Ramsey Order going through right now? What is Kevin Moore going through right now, right? What is Diamond Reynolds, right, who was holding on to her child, right? She was holding on to her child as she was filming that in the backseat, right? So anytime you pick up your cell phone, yes, it does come with courage, but it's also a scary ordeal. It's a very scary ordeal. So you think about it, how much courage does it take for you to hold on to your child to be able to film a situation where your loved one is getting killed right in front of you, right? That's what we're talking about with citizen journalism, right? It's people really stepping into their power, as we say, saying within our movement, and being able to show that, in this, I can't stop you from doing what you're gonna do, because if I choose to put my hands on you, like sometimes we want to, right? That's also a 7-year case, at least in New York City it is. Or if you try to push an officer off of, grabbing you, that's a potential case on you, because that is what the conversation is. That is the relationship that exists right now, because we understand that the relationship is not just between the police and the community, it's also a relationship between the police, the court system, right? The elected officials who put in the laws in the first place, and the people who you don't see who benefit from all of this. Right, and I think that's really the opportunity that we have with the citizen journalism. You may just be viewing one situation, but essentially what's happening is you're seeing, for that moment in time, you're seeing a system exposed. Now, what the opportunity that we have to do is, what do we do with these videos? What do we do with them?
You call me as a reporter. Thank you for that. I think this is a good time to open it up for questions. Yeah, just stand up. Do they need to be mic'd? Because I can play Oprah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. I want to be the first person to buy that outfit with all the cameras, so I'll give you my card. I just have a question. Anyone can address it. Do you remember after Ferguson, a black minister came out and said, he's tired of black people complaining about what happened at Ferguson. When police ask you to get off the sidewalk or do something, do it. Do you remember that? I just thought, how would you address that kind of, it was a voice in the wilderness, but it sort of went viral, I think, at the time.
I would answer it by telling him, come to Ferguson. Don Lemon, Anderson Cooper, anybody that came to Ferguson, they understand the 5-second rule. You can't stand still for 5 seconds or you'll go to jail. I had to be rescued because of the 5-second rule. So for anybody to say, cooperate, do what you're supposed to do, I would say, come beat me for 30 seconds. You won't make it 5.
Before I ask my question, first of all, thank you. Thank each and every one of you so much for all you do. I'm going to try not to get emotional because it's big stuff. Could you explain the 5-second rule?
Well,
we don't all know.
Well, the 5-second rule was implemented during the time of the disarray or the rioting, where you could not stand still on the sidewalk on West Florissant for 5 seconds. Meaning, if I passed you and I saw you and you asked me a question and I stopped, excuse me, I just broke the law.
There's a scene in Do Not Resist that we show that, and Anderson Cooper is walking down the street saying, the cops are saying that if anyone stops moving, it was a intimidation tactic because they didn't want people, and it wasn't even during the riot. There was riots. This was during the protest. People were walking down the street, and the police wanted to corral people into one area and say, this is the protest area. Well, that's not constitutionally legal anyway, but they were going to corral them in one certain area. Or if you didn't want to be in that area, you had to keep moving. So if anybody was stopped still for even a small amount of time, and even I stopped to film the cops, and they're like, "Keep moving, sir." And then next thing you know, someone got arrested. Some individual got arrested. I'm sure you were down there that day as well, for not for not walking. And there was elderly people down there that said, well, do we have to also keep walking? Because it's tough to, but they were just out there to protest. But it was just another layer of intimidation that to try to break up, the protest. So instead of facilitating the protest, which is what they should have done, they met it with the full force of, everything that they had.
Wow. Yeah, that's case in point, a really wild detail that not all of us know. I was going to ask about, talking about systems, I was going to ask about police departments, public information offices, and specifically their social media presences. Their police departments have Twitter accounts. Folks who tune in at home when there are these incidents, they're a real mixed bag. The standards that the practices, the way that they use their social media accounts. It looked like Dallas, when their incident had happened, they'd been using it in a kind of community outreach, feel-good way. They'd been taking photos with demonstrators earlier the day. Baltimore, they were doing ostensibly sort of public safety announcements, but with a real slant that journalists couldn't get away with, in terms of a bunch of violent rioters are congregating at this intersection, avoid, danger, lots of all caps and things like that. I was wondering, and the answer may be no, I was wondering whether those Twitter accounts specifically actually have affected your work in real time as journalists, whether citizens are tuned in, whether it's Blue Lives Matter folks who tune in and it shapes the narrative in that way. It seems like a small part of a big system. I'm just curious, you guys' take.
So we're talking about social media accounts from police departments.
Yep.
I'm smiling just because there was, I can't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago, there was a kind of social media campaign that the NYPD did called My NYPD. And their whole thing was that they wanted folks to take pictures with their neighborhood police as a way to show appreciation and to post it. So again, it goes back to relationships, right? And what they did see is there were a lot of people who were posting pictures on Twitter, and a lot of people talking about their so-called relationships with the police. Thankfully, the majority of those pictures were of people being beaten, at protests. People who had taken pictures, saying of their loved ones being arrested. And it was definitely one of those situations where it was be careful of what you wish for, because when you get asked how people feel about the police, and this is not an issue of us against them, this is not an issue of anger, this is an issue, again, as I talked about, of reality, right? And it was flooded, and for a while they shut down, saying that campaign because it wasn't exactly what they wanted, but sprinklings in between there, you saw tourist pictures, saying people who were not from the city coming in and smiling with police officers on, let's say, 42nd Street or in, saying another nicer part of the city. But anytime you came to a community color, anytime you came to a primarily immigrant community, that was the situation. And I thought that was very helpful, certainly not to the police, but for us to be able to tell stories with pictures. And the fact that, again, when I don't know anybody in my neighborhood or any other neighborhood like mine who are, saying having fun times or having tea or, saying playing hopscotch with police. And I don't say that lightly. I say it to the fact that, again, oftentimes, saying these are also campaigns that, some of the elected officials or some of our so-called community leaders want to be able to support. It's like, hey, this is opportunities that we can use to be able to show this, but there's still this reinforcement of let's gloss over everything that's happening and just put, saying photos that we can lift up to say that, hey, there are folks, because at the end of the day, there are police officers, right, who are trying to challenge. They're certainly not going to have their picture taken because oftentimes, they also can be fired. But I think that one of the things that we also have to be mindful of, and I'll stop with this, is the intelligence division in New York City was used as a breeding ground for surveillance tactics against the Muslim community. And they had a specific division called the Muslim Surveillance Team. When that was disbanded, one of the things that they did is they may have got rid of the name of the team, but what they did is all their findings, all their tactics that they used, they pretty much decentralized it into the larger intelligence division, right? And what happened from that is they ended up assigning a new team. That team is specifically responsible for surveilling social media, right? the idea from NYPD also came from them, right? And what they use that for is to be able to conduct the largest New York City raid in Manhattanville and Grant Houses, which is in West Harlem, where I'm from. But since then, in the last 2 years, we've also seen an increase in raids that have been targeted at public housing, right? So I say that to say that, you know, just from being able to put out something that's more like a hashtag, it oftentimes comes with the cover for other things that are happening, and oftentimes it is a way to be able to surveil.
There's a question right here.
Y'all are fabulous. Thank you. And just as we as a community are aware of the fact that everyone has a cell phone in their pocket and has the capacity to be a camera person and, you know, film such incidents as this, I'm curious if any of you could speak to police strategies about finding the people who film the videos. And I just also wanted to mention, for anyone who isn't aware, Field of Vision, which is connected to The Intercept, which published your piece, has just created a new secure drop for people to be able to upload video without being able to be traced to their source.
Actually, being a person that filmed the police, that sparked America, there's no reward. There's no protection. I've been shot. I've been beat up. I've been stalked. I have personal police escorts that don't help me. So I wouldn't encourage when a person does stick their neck out and say, hey, that's not right. Don't make them a bigger target than they're already making themselves.
Yeah, I think that's why like a secure drop, something like that, would be incredibly helpful for people that want to avoid the aftermath of, you know, all the backlash. I mean, look no further than the Eric Gardner case. It's unbelievable. Yeah, I think more opportunities for people to be anonymous and say that, I think that could add a very interesting layer.
Just real quickly, I think, thank you for asking that question. I think what we've been seeing, especially since some of the videos and the people who have filmed the videos, their names have become more public, is that you're seeing direct, you know, saying repression, you know, saying on the street where cops are certainly a lot more aggressive when they see officers, people, you know, filming. What you're also seeing sometimes is where you have officers will literally take their flashlight, you know, saying, and try to put it in the field of view, or you'll have another officer, at least in New York City, again, when you're dealing with a police stop, you're not dealing with one or two officers. Oftentimes, you're dealing with what may start, you know what I'm saying, as the officer and their partner, and usually they're calling in other folks because there's so many cops on the street that they're going to respond. So it ends up being around 10 where you'll have an officer or other officers will stand in front and act like they're trying to talk to you, but what they're really trying to do is to block their field of view. So when we train, one of the things that we do is we ask that, one, you have to be mobile on your feet, you know, saying make sure that you're trying to be able to get aligned while protecting yourself, but we also encourage folks to ask other people to film, right? This, again, we're always trying to reinforce this sense of community to the pack where at the end of the day, like in these current conditions, in the current wave of repression in Washington, D.C., we certainly are talking about 2 elected officials who are certainly in line with creating more repression, to be very honest about it, that we want to make sure that those folks are also keeping themselves safe as well. So when we train, usually we train as part of joining teams, right, or creating teams. But if that's not a situation that you have the ability to do, at least asking other people to film with you, so it's a lot harder to block your sight, can be something that you can do to protect yourself against the increased wave that's coming from the police.
There's a question from someone in the back. The blue, yes.
This might be a statement of the obvious, but in the last few years, there's been a TV network called Investigative Discovery that has really taken off. And it's basically 24 hours, 7 days a week of showing how police solve homicide cases. Do you think this network is a good, it can be for anyone on the panel, do you think this particular network and its popularity are a good example of the whole mythology of the police always in the public interest? That this is a good example of that, reinforcing that myth?
Sure. I mean, I haven't seen it, but, you know, it's very common that we see this throughout media, you know, and someone mentioned earlier the show Cops. It's always shown, you know, what we talk about is whoever holds the camera holds the power, right? So even if we talk about police body cams as somehow being the solution to a deep systemic issue, we're finding police departments are very much in favor of that, because more often than not, it's presenting their point of view, and as opposed to a point of view of what they are doing, or a community point of view, or the point of view of people who are witnessing it. So I don't think we're going to get a more complete picture. We're going to get a very one-sided picture, literally, a particular perspective, if this is the kind of media we're seeing. And with that, it's not just a physical point of view. Again, it's this entire kind of loaded mythology. So I think it's very important that that these tools and the perspective is coming from people from the community. Yeah.
Can I also I'm not familiar with the show, and it sounds like it, nourishes the prevailing mythology. I would just add a sort of complication, which is, if you think about it, a huge part of our popular culture is given over to police dramas that don't actually portray police in a positive light. Think Training Day, The Shield, The Wire. You can go on and on. So, I mean, it's a genre as robust, as strong, as central to our kind of imaginative archetypes as Westerns are. And I don't know quite what to do with that observation, but that it's not the mythology, but it's something that we sort of play with imaginatively, with, I think, very little consequence for our sense of our responsibilities as citizens. Do people come out of Training Day and mobilize against police abuse? So anyway, I mean, I just wanted to throw that out as a dimension of the landscape we're working in.
Chris?
Well, for me, as far as investigational TV goes, from having the experience of working with Lyric and various others and being involved in understanding how TV works, for me, it's troubling, investigational TV and the cop shows and all of that, because you see the evil of the police department, but you also see the greater evil that they create, which is us. So regardless of on cops, we'll see the cops roll up and jump out and pummel a person. And there's no questions, there's no regards. I love cops, actually. Like the show, not cops. But I like the show because...
Important distinction.
Yes, I love the show. But on that show, that's the only time I can see people outside of my color get treated the same way I get treated on a regular basis. So also with investigational TV, Darren Seals, a man that's known everywhere, we can't get an investigation into his murder. So when I cut on the TV and see shows like that, it just makes me wonder, what are they really investigating?
I think we have time for one or two questions. The young lady in the white blouse. Yeah, that's right, she's looking around. She's looking around for a mic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexa Imani Spencer. I am a sophomore journalism major at Howard University, and I'm from Austin, Texas. My question addresses mental health. I know as a journalist, it is a very powerful job. You have an obligation to truth, and with that truth comes a lot of pain. When you're exposed to so much death and when you're exposed to so much hatred. I know as a Black woman on a regular basis, I find myself troubled just turning on my cell phone and seeing videos of my brothers dying constantly. When I saw Mike Brown die, I had to call my brother to make sure he was okay. So I just wanted to know, how do you all deal with the potential trauma that comes with the work that you do?
I will say that's a good question, talking about mental health, and I will just say I don't have the answer to that per se. I think it's something that I'm still working through. But I will say that a lot of, something about the Mike Brown's body layout on Canfield Drive for 4.5 hours. So children walked through that. Like that street was literally the middle of the community. So the body was out there so long, the school day ended. Babies were pushed past it. The day went on. Music was played by the body. So I guess what I'm saying is that the trauma beyond the videos, when there is no justice, or sort of what in the community narrative greatly differs than the official narrative, the police narrative, or in the case of the Mike Brown situation, the Department of Justice report into the shooting, that's still traumatizing. The fact that this space, sort of, the body is still in memory, but there has been no justice. So I think that is also a level of the community is still getting through, because so many people testified, for instance, for that report that took time to re-traumatize themselves and go into intense details of the day and picture it so clearly and sort of articulate this to the FBI investigators and to the Department of Justice. But then when they read the report, it's like sort of that testimony was not accurately reflected. So in terms of mental health, I think that's what we need to think about these videos. The people that see them but see no justice. I think that's an added level of trauma, and sort of that's what I see with Chris, because he was so brave with these videos. They made it to the DOJ. They're referenced in the DOJ report about the Mike Brown shooting. Unfortunately, the report saying that all the sort of voices in there have been debunked. What the people are saying is wrong, but the video's right. But it's like, what does that do for your mental health? And I don't know the answer. And I think just from knowing Chris, he goes back and forth. And I know other citizen journalists that are wavering, like, should I have filmed this? What has it bought? What has it done for the community? In fact, there is no justice. There is no indictment. What does the video do? So that's why when I hear Chris say, every time I see a video, I see Mike Brown. Because when there's no justice, it's just repetitive, if that makes sense. And it almost makes you question the act. And so that's why, I guess that's why we're working together, just in trying to sort of add credibility to these community perspectives, because there are people who feel that what they saw was not believed. And that is traumatizing when you saw it.
One more. Lady in black. I'm sorry, I didn't see him. Two more, yes. Thank you.
So dealing with police, it's always been a power struggle. There's always been this issue of police exercising the power over community. As a society, we've been at war for 20 years. And have any of you taken a look at the kind of open pipeline there is between the police and returning vets? And what, we've got the equipment, but we also have these soldiers coming back that are funneling into our police departments across the country, and what kind of effect that might be having as well.
Well, I can say that, at least anecdotally, our findings were the exact same findings of I believe the ACLU report, which was the fact that 40% of the SWAT team members were ex-military. And we were going out with individuals who had been blown up in some of these armored vehicles and expressed to us how they had severe PTSD returning home. How long have you been home? Oh, 18 months. And we're riding around with these guys fully armed, and just their situational awareness, what they call hypervigilant, looking around, snapping their head, and you could see that there was still some residual feelings. But it's conditioned response, muscle memory. You put the tools of war back on, you're doing the exact same raids that you were doing Fallujah. There's no separation. To the point that it even goes further. The trainer that we cover in Do Not Resist, Dave Grossman, this is a man that spent 25 years teaching the military how to improve their kill ratio, because the military wasn't killing enough people in war. So they had to figure out a way to interrupt the natural defense mechanism for humans not to want to kill other humans. There's a species defense mechanism. Deer will lock horns, but they'll gore another species. So there's an ingrained defense mechanism for survival that species don't want to kill the other species. Well, Dave Grossman was hired to basically interrupt that natural mechanism, to not allow you to stop and think before you shoot someone. Conditioned response. You do it through desensitization training, and you do it by operant conditioning. And that's what he did for 25 years. He's been teaching law enforcement for 18 years about you are men and women of violence. You're supposed to use violence to solve your tools. Enjoy the killing. I talk to people all the time. They start to say they enjoy the killing, and that's not a bad place to be. This is the type of messaging that has been going out to law enforcement, and we were absolutely shocked to see. But it's a depressing realization when you look into the training records of the officer that killed Philando Castile. He had attended one of these guys' trainings months in the past. So to me, it's not only the physical tools of war, it's the returning mentality that we have to deal with, because we've trained up all these people to interrupt their natural defense mechanism to kill so that we could use them in war. It's just mind-blowing to me that we did. I mean, we better make sure that we're going to war for the right reasons. Don't send a whole, generation of people interrupting their self-defense mechanism, which creates them human, just so that you can go, take someone's natural resources. Don't think that that's not going to have a residual effect as that returns home and comes back home. And I saw it across the board. Sometimes the military officers can be a huge asset on the SWAT team because they are tactically more trained and they've had de-escalation training. West Virginia, the man who faced off against a suicidal person who had a gun, unloaded gun at his side, he was a military. This happened 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago. He was a military officer. Now a police officer. He was trained in de-escalation. So he's like, no, I'm not going to kill you. You're suicidal. I'm not going to kill you. And the guy's like, it was a suicide by cop situation. He's like, I'm not going to kill you. You don't have to die today. 2 other cops came around, shot him in the back of the head, and killed him. The officer that didn't fire got fired. Got fired for not killing the guy. How do we not have some sort of provision that if this man wants to be a hero and put himself in danger to preserve a life? The message that we're sending is if you do that, you get fired. If you use restraint, you get fired. If you try to de-escalate a situation, you get fired. But, so it's the mentality that is getting confused. We have all the tools and we have the aggressiveness, but we don't have the de-escalation that the military also, has. So. Sure. I mean, yes. That's true.
The final audience question, the gentleman in the top.
Thank you. And your question amazingly leads into mine, and mine began with your question, what do we do with these videos in addition to the Washington Post and The Intercept? The Library of Congress has a Veterans Oral History Project, and they now accept videos, and it occurred to me that you might work, I think it's under the American Folklore Department, and a group of people might want to work with the Library of Congress and the American Folklore Department and set up something that is properly curated, provides all of the protections for people who want to submit, and then work with people in Congress, because the worst they can do is say no, and you might even get a very nice documentary having them say no. Or not. Thank you.
That's a great point.
Thank you, guys. I had one final, as moderator, I do get the final question, and it goes to Chris. I want to know, after your experience, and you talked about it here, would you do it again?
Because of my community and the people that I represent, yes. I know in due time, people tell me they're gonna kill you. You better be quiet. You better stop. When I before the videos made CNN, the people in my community saw it. And the conversation was, don't show anybody. I had to make a choice, and I chose, and I'll do it again.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming out, spending your morning with us. Thanks to the panel. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
This was a fabulous panel. Thank you all, each of you. Because it was so fabulous, we actually pushed over the other panel, which was supposed to start at 10:30. First person singular is actually starting at 11. So if you wanted to make that one, it's at the Zenger room. And the prisons panel is starting here at 11:15.
A difficult choice.